Hi there. In this video, I will be discussing bodies as a social construction, specifically fat bodies. So in Unit 4, we watched a video called In Praise of Fat, and it was a very compelling video, and it was really great to see different bodies being represented as sexual, and especially a fat body as sexual with a non-fat body, and expressing that there is still a desire there. However, the comments on the video were very upsetting, and it kind of made me want to dig deeper into the subject of fat bodies as rejected bodies. One comment in particular read, "Overweight women are not entitled to or deserve to have a sex life." This was very reminiscent of Tobin Sieber's discussion on who has access to sexuality in his piece on disability theory. I believe that this topic is really important to discuss as we're in a culture where new types of women are visibly emerging, like trans women and women with disabilities are becoming more visible, and they don't all have the same bodies, but they are all still women. So that the stigma of being fat affects men and women, I will be primarily focusing on the specific population of overweight females and how their weight affects others' perceptions of them. It's important to note that for women, reported rates of weight discrimination are comparable to those of racial discrimination. This is very significant to me because as a society, we generally understand that racism is wrong, but we have extreme difficulty not partaking in fat shaming and policing people and discriminating against people because of their size. This can be attributed to the emotion of disgust, as explained by Sarah Ahmed, and our fear of associating with things that society has deemed other. According to researchers, most people, including medical professionals, have internalized implicit weight bias, which means that they are automatically associating fat with poor health, and they're completely unaware of the bias. So even health professionals are actively discriminating against the fat population and creating this moral panic and fear of being fat and being obese for health problems. So the ideal healthy body size has fluctuated throughout history. According to Judith Lorber and Patricia Yancey Martin, the average weight of the Miss America contestants has declined by more than 20 pounds since the 70s. However, the average adult in the U.S. weighs 10 pounds more than they weighed a decade ago. So clearly there's a weight disparity that's increasing. Our celebrities, people we see in magazines, are getting smaller and we're getting bigger. So this is going to increase dissatisfaction with our bodies, especially for females who are represented in the media more often. Historically, full-bodied women were seen as ideal. It expressed expressed wealth and power. And muscled, thin bodies, on the other hand, represented those of working class, like slaves. So today, however, fat is an issue of morals. Being overweight is indicative of laziness, lack of discipline, and an unwillingness to conform to society's standards of beauty. This brings us to an important intersection of obesity and poverty. An excellent example of this can be seen in the show Here Comes Honey Boo Boo. And in her article, Here Comes Honey Boo Boo and the Spectacle of the Ungovernable Child, Kristen Hatch presents a really thought-provoking discussion about the structural inequalities that contribute to obesity. America is fascinated and disgusted by obesity, which is clearly seen by the number of viewers who watch shows like The Biggest Loser, where the contestants are made to stand on the scales in their underwear and the camera pans over all of their rolls in their flesh, and they're essentially just spectacles for us to make fun of and be disgusted by. But in terms of the TLC show about Honey Boo Boo, America really loves to be repulsed by Mama June and her sticky body. They see her as an unfit mother. She can't even take care of her own body and conform to the beauty standards in place by our society. And she also encourages her kids to reject those beauty standards that require them to lose weight. In society, weight is continuously discussed in the context of choices and frivolity, but no one discusses the systematic inequality that takes choices out of the equation. So though Honey Boo Boo and her family clearly suffer from poor nutrition, this is not out of neglect or choice, but as a direct result of poverty and limited access to nutritious foods, and also limited access to health care. Hatch cites that Mama June feeds her family of 6 on just $80 a week, which adds up to 63 cents per meal per person. Processed foods are more affordable and accessible to families of lower socioeconomic classes, and therefore we can clearly see that poverty has a direct effect on obesity and health. Clearly, the link between poverty and obesity needs to be addressed before making moral judgments about people who are overweight. Though obesity is clearly not a result of a lack of morals, Western society views those who are overweight as disgusting. So to just touch on Sarah Ahmed's piece and her chapter called The Performativity of Disgust, fat bodies are clearly stickier than slender ones. People are revolted and offended by fat women that dare to wear a bikini or any kind of revealing clothing or to assert themselves as desirable. According to Ahmed, some bodies are okay, and some bodies are marginalized and othered. And that means that if we are in contact with these other bodies, we could also be marginalized by association and by proximity. So an example of this comes from a horrible employer I had once. He had an anecdote about a woman he used to date who was apparently the greatest woman alive, except for her weight. And his friends continually made fun of him for associating with her and asked him when he was going to get rid of his big-ass problem. So he ended their relationship eventually and explained that he didn't want people to think he was attracted to fat girls. Fat shaming is just one way that fat bodies are policed. So even successful women, like extremely talented women like Kelly Clarkson, Gabori Sabid, Western society focuses on the things they lack and not their merits. They're also, because they're not slim, they're not perceived as feminine enough. The ideal woman is slender, which indicates that she takes care of her body and conforms to the heterosexual male's ideals of femininity. Lorber and Martin discuss the increased pressures on heterosexual women to conform to rigid beauty standards, and they talk about how lesbians are generally heavier and more satisfied with their bodies than their heterosexual counterparts. Lorber states, members of a society try to shape and use their bodies to conform to their cultures or racial ethnic groups' expectations of how a woman's body, a man's body, a girl's body, or a boy's body should look. This point does not deny the distinctiveness of material bodies with their different physical shapes, sizes, strengths, and weaknesses. It does emphasize, however, that members of a society do not genes or biology, determine the proper shape and usage of women's, men's, boys, and girls' bodies. In a similar sense, or to sum that up in an analogy, many men believe that females should be able to achieve vaginal orgasms, though this is not the way that the female anatomy works 70% of the time. But in the same way, we believe all bodies should conform to the way we think they should look, rather than accepting the way they do look and enjoying the variance in the human body. On another note, I think this is important to talk about. So in discussing body variance, I think it's really important to make a connection between the obese population and those with disabilities. So the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 has a very long definition for impairment and disability, and it defines impairment as a physiological disorder, condition, cosmetic disfigurement, or anatomical loss affecting one or more of the following systems. It includes the neurological, musculoskeletal, special sense organs, respiratory, cardiovascular, reproductive, digestive, genitourinary, hemic and lymphatic, skin and endocrine, and while that is certainly a mouthful, by definition, obesity would fall under this category of disability, as it does affect one or more of those systems. The medicalization of disabilities like obesity often dehumanizes the person in question and focuses solely on the condition, which is why it's so important discussing the medical professionals having this bias against obese people and overweight people and thinking that they're automatically not healthy. An example of this dehumanization and focusing just on the condition, just on the disability, is very prevalent in pornography. There's separate fetish categories for people with disabilities, amputees, and BBWs, big beautiful women, or obese women. So they're completely separate, and it's clear that they're reduced to their disabilities in terms of sex and essentially fetishized for it instead of being a whole person. They're not part of the mainstream pornography culture. In an essay titled Disparate but Disabled, April Herndon writes, "The prospect of having one's body read as a text about slovenly behavior, inherent flaws, and abnormality, all narratives associated with fat people and disabled people in general, robs many women of what they think of as a significant source of power." So what she's saying is we are essentially robbing these women of their bodies because they're different. We're basically saying that we're reading them based on their appearance, and they have a lot more to offer than that. So in conclusion, I really think that it's important to deconstruct our current understandings of bodies as empty vessels, to be molded into these rigid ideas of perfect, and we need to move in a direction of reconstructing our notions of all bodies as sites of empowerment and freedom. Thank you very much.